Hello everyone, my name is Chad Ellsbury, Assistant Director with the Iowa High School Athletic Association. I've had the good fortune over the years to work with both students and adults in the issues of communication and leadership. Prior to my time with the Athletic Association, I was a newspaper editor, so I worked in communities dealing with issues of communication and how we as a community can come together at times to deal with some of the difficult issues that we have to. Let's take a few moments and kind of explore this topic together, the idea of leadership and what it means. So what is leadership? If we think about leadership in the broader context, are we talking about leadership as a student, leadership as a community member, or leadership as a member of maybe a sport team or student council, or maybe within an MVP program, Mentors in Violence Prevention? What does leadership mean, and how can it help us determine our role? If we look at Google, for example, and we pull out our smartphone or our laptop or our tablet and we ask Google, what is leadership? The responses we get will be 597 million. 597 million to the simple question of what is leadership? So I like to think of leadership as kind of like a river. And there's a lot of tributaries that feed into that river of leadership. Sometimes leadership takes on different roles depending upon whether you're a student or whether you're an adult or whether you're part of your family or in the workplace. And sometimes there is not much leadership in situations when it's needed. Think of a river that runs low or runs dry. It needs that feed from the tributary. Think of a river that's flooding. Too much leadership. I think sometimes we've all been in situations, maybe a group project in school, where we've had a lot of strong-willed people and they kind of have their voice and their vision for how the project should go. And at times that competing interest of what the vision is and what the leadership is can really put the project back a ways. So it's important to think of leadership as many things, just as Google tells us, 597 million things that come into the aspect of leadership. Let's start to dive into maybe a few of those as we try to figure this out. There are a number of leadership ideas, as we talked about from our Google search, over 597 million. Here are 10 of the kind of the more well-known leadership theories. If you go to a business school or take a leadership seminar or take a leadership workshop, you might talk about some of these concepts or leadership styles, so to speak, with regard to leadership. We're not going to dive into these today, but they do exist. They are out there. You're more than welcome to go dive fully or more fully into the concepts of leadership after we get done with our workshop. But I just want to acknowledge that there are a number of competing visions for how leadership plays out in our society and within our culture. If we think of leadership, I like to look at leadership as kind of a confluence. Once again, a river being fed by many tributaries. And I think those tributaries are things like communication, the connections, and then finally the leadership opportunities that we have as individuals. I think we build upon it. I think leadership in many respects becomes kind of part of a process. If we think about the world we live in today and some of the issues that we face as a society, as a culture, and we look back at some of the leaders of the past number of years here in the United States, one leader we can look towards is Dr. Martin Luther King. He has a fairly famous quote that people fail to get along because they fear each other, and that they fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. Think about the groups in your school. Think about the groups in your community. Maybe there are groups that are at odds with each other. How much have they truly communicated? How much have they really sat down and listened in civil discourse to talk about the ideas that they face and the struggles that you might face in your community, in your school? It's really important as leaders, as student leaders, to be willing to engage and listen to the various perspectives that other students might have. We'll talk more about perspectives in a few minutes. I think it's also important to think of leadership as a process, not an outcome. We know that as individuals, as people, we constantly grow, change, and adapt over time. And I think leadership has to be willing to do that too. If we're focused on a specific outcome, we might lose the possibilities along the way. And leadership, I really think, is a process. And the idea of the MVP program, for example, the bystander model, which is foundational to the MVP program, requires us to notice the event or the incident, interpret it as a problem, take responsibility or assume responsibility, and attempt to help. That is a process-driven model. So whether you know it or not, just being involved in the MVP program, you're already accepting the concept that leadership is a process. And it's a process by which we go about our daily lives each and every day. I've had the good fortune to work with Dr. Alan Heisterkamp and the Center for Violence Prevention out of UNI for a number of years now. I'm also a trainer in the MVP model. And I think it's really important. As I went through the training, it became very aware to me that it wasn't just about my thoughts, but it was about the perspectives and ideas and the change that was going on in the people around me. And I want to take a few moments to look at a video from a fairly well-known psychologist, Dr. Dan Gilbert, who talks about process and change and how we as people continually are in that process of change.
You know, at every stage of our lives, we make decisions that will profoundly influence the lives of the people we're going to become. And then when we become those people, we're not always thrilled with the decisions we made. So young people pay good money to get tattoos removed that teenagers paid good money to get. Middle-aged people rush to divorce people who young adults rushed to marry. Older adults work hard to lose what middle-aged adults worked hard to gain. On and on and on. The question is, as a psychologist, that fascinates me is, why do we make decisions that our future selves so often regret? Now, I think one of the reasons I'll try to convince you today is that we have a fundamental misconception about the power of time. Every one of you knows that the rate of change slows over the human lifespan, that your children seem to change by the minute, but your parents seem to change by the year. But what is the name of this magical point in life where change suddenly goes from a gallop to a crawl? Is it teenage years? Is it middle age? Is it old age? The answer, it turns out, for most people is now, wherever now happens to be. What I want to convince you today is that all of us are walking around with an illusion that history, our personal history, has just come to an end, that we have just recently become the people that we were always meant to be and will be for the rest of our lives. Let me give you some data to back up that claim. So here's a study of change in people's personal values over time. Here's 3 values. Everybody here holds all of them, but you probably know that as you grow, as you age, the balance of these values shifts. So how does it do so? Well, we asked thousands of people. We asked half of them to predict for us how much their values would change in the next 10 years, and the other is to tell us how much their values had changed in the last 10 years. And this enabled us to do a really interesting kind of analysis, because it allowed us to compare the predictions of people, say, 18 years old to the reports of people who were 28, and to do that kind of analysis throughout the lifespan. Here's what we found. First of all, you're right. Change does slow down as we age. But second, you're wrong, because it doesn't slow nearly as much as we think. At every age from 18 to 68 in our data set, people vastly underestimated how much change they would experience over the next 10 years. We call this the end of history illusion. To give you an idea of the magnitude of this effect, you can connect these 2 lines, and what you see here is that 18-year-olds anticipate changing only as much as 50-year-olds actually do. Now, it's not just values, it's all sorts of other things. For example, personality. Many of you know that psychologists now claim that there are 5 fundamental dimensions of personality: neuroticism, openness to experience, agreeableness, extroversion, and conscientiousness. Again, we asked people how much they expected to change over the next 10 years, and also how much they had changed over the last 10 years. And what we found, well, you're going to get used to seeing this diagram over and over, because once again, the rate of change does slow as we age, but at every age, people underestimate how much their personalities will change in the next decade. And it isn't just ephemeral things like values and personality. You can ask people about their likes and dislikes, their basic preferences. For example, name your best friend, your favorite kind of vacation, what's your favorite hobby, what's your favorite kind of music. People can name these things. We ask half of them to tell us, do you think that that will change over the next 10 years? And half of them to tell us, did that change over the last 10 years? And what we find, well, you've seen it twice now, and here it is again. People predict that the friend they have now is the friend they'll have in 10 years. The vacation they most enjoy now is the one they'll enjoy in 10 years. And yet, people who are 10 years older all say, that's really changed. Does any of this matter? Is this just a form of misprediction that doesn't have consequences? No, it matters quite a bit, and I'll give you an example of why. It bedevils our decision-making in important ways. Bring to mind right now for yourself your favorite musician today and your favorite musician 10 years ago. I put mine up on the screen to help you along. Now, we ask people to predict for us, to tell us how much money they would pay right now to see their current favorite musician perform in concert 10 years from now. And on average, people said they would pay $129 for that ticket. And yet, when we asked them how much they would pay to see the person who was their favorite 10 years ago perform today, they say only $80. Now, in a perfectly rational world, these should be the same number, but we overpay for the opportunity to indulge our current preferences because we overestimate their stability. Why does this happen? We're not entirely sure, but it probably has to do with the ease of remembering versus the difficulty of imagining. Most of us can remember who we were 10 years ago, but we find it hard to imagine who we're going to be. And then we mistakenly think that because it's hard to imagine, it's not likely to happen. Sorry, when people say, I can't imagine that, they're usually talking about their own lack of imagination and not about the unlikelihood of the event that they're describing. The bottom line is, time is a powerful force. It transforms our preferences, it reshapes our values, it alters our personalities. We seem to appreciate this fact, but only in retrospect. Only when we look backwards do we realize how much change happens in a decade. It's as if, for most of us, the present is a magic time. It's a watershed on the timeline. It's the moment at which we finally become ourselves. Human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. The person you are right now is as transient, as fleeting, and as temporary as all the people you've ever been. The one constant in our life is change. Thank you.
Wow, as we look at that video from Dan Gilbert and kind of explore this idea that we're constantly in a state of change. We're constantly becoming who we're going to be in the future. Some people find that idea a little bit unsettling. I think it presents wonderful opportunities because it gives us the opportunity to make the future what we want. It gives us the opportunity for growth. It really doesn't matter how we interacted with people last week, 6 months ago, a year ago. What matters is how we interact with people now and tomorrow and next week and into the future. We have the opportunity for growth. That's the wonderful thing about the human condition, the idea of growth and change and adaptability over time. But I think part of being a leader means understanding that people may have different perspectives, different views on the world. And I want to take a few moments to just kind of explore that idea of perspective and what that means. We'll use a real simple kind of tool to do that. If we look at the word perspective, it's a noun. It's the state of one's ideas in a meaningful relationship. How do we take everything that influences us, from the internet, to movies, to the music we listen to our family lives, to our daily lives as students and the activities that we're involved in? How do we take all of these ideas and put them in a meaningful relationship in terms of how we see the world, how we perceive the world? That forms our perspective on issues and ideas. For example, bear with me for a few moments as we role play this little video. Here's a car. Here's a simple little blue car, 4-door. I like to call it seafoam blue because it's got a little bit of green to it too. But if I were to offer you this car as a student, or if I were to offer you this car as an adult, you might say, yeah, that's not a bad car. I kind of like that car. But what if I were to offer you this car instead? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Chad, that's the same car. Well, yes, it is the same car, but it's also a different car because of the way that we're looking at it. We've changed the angle, we've changed the lighting. It's a different car. So we have the option for that first car, we have the option for the second car, or what if I gave you the option for a third car? And here's that third car. Looks a little different, doesn't it? Once again, we've changed the way that we're perceiving this car. We've added a palm tree in the back. We've added lights casting down on the car. We've changed the angle of view that we took the photo of this car. There's maybe even a story here. Maybe we're at a beach or a sunny place or a place like Florida or California where they have palm trees. And we've added to the story. We've added to the exposition. In a sense, we've changed our perspective because of the additional ideas that are helping make meaning as we perceive something. So we can have the simple car, or we can have the car at a slight angle, or we can have this car. Once again, it's the same car, but we've changed our perspective. You might be saying, how does this apply to what we do in school? How does this apply to MVP? How does this apply to my sport team? Well, think about your sport teams. Maybe you're a football player or a basketball player, or maybe you're simply involved in a speech, theater, debate, or an outside of school activity. But let's use the example of a sport team. Say you're a football team and you're 3-0. If you're 3-0, you feel like this car. You feel pretty good because you're undefeated. But what if you're 0-3 and you haven't won a game? Well, that takes on a little different perspective. And that perspective is based upon the fact that you haven't won a game. Even though you have the same coaches, you have the same teammates, you have the same fans in the stands, but the simple act of not being, successful on the field in terms of wins and losses changes your perspective, even though everything else is the same. If we keep extending that analogy of a sport team, we can look at the idea of goal versus purpose. Your goal may be to be undefeated, or to win 6 out of 10 games, or to win 7 out of 9 games. But what's your purpose in being out for that activity? If your goal is to only win, then you can have a very, very miserable season if your team does not perform well. But if your purpose is to make friends, to be a part of a group, and to be part of something larger than yourself, then there's a lot more that can happen whether you're winning or losing. Same thing with maybe music, for example. We share our offices at the Athletic Association with the Iowa High School Music Association. And I've heard a lot of stories over the years from their director about the process of auditioning for all-state music, for example. It's a very competitive process. So if the goal is only to make all-state versus maybe the purpose of improving, of getting better, of becoming a better performer, those are very different things. So I think it's really important to understand the idea of purpose and how it plays into process. So I know, once again, you might be asking yourself, Chad, how does this factor into what I'm doing with MVP, or what I'm doing with my athletic team, or even what I'm doing at my local high school? Well, ask yourself this simple question. What is your purpose? Why do I participate in activities? What is my role as a mentor in the MVP program? When do I take a stand? How does it feel to be my classmate? How do I define success? And how does it feel to be my friend? And where do I find role models? I think these are really important self-reflective questions we have to ask ourselves. And once again, it's part of what is your purpose in terms of leadership in your community, in your school, in your group of friends. If we look at the list of questions, think about your purpose once again as a leader in your community, at your school, within your group of friends. What is your purpose? Sometimes when we do these sessions or workshops in person, I'll have the group of students individually write down a purpose statement. You can think about it as kind of your personal mission statement. Not about what you want to achieve as a goal, but what do you want to achieve in terms of making a difference in the world? What do you want to achieve in terms of working with your group? with your team, with the MVP program. I think purpose statements are much more useful than mission statements because it's not about a goal, it's about the process. We've taken in a lot of information in the last 20 minutes or so as we've talked about this idea of leadership, process, and communication. I want to end with a quote from a fairly well-known individual, Abraham Lincoln, our former president. The best way to predict the future is to create it. The best way to predict the future is to create it. That works very closely with the ideas that Dan Gilbert played in the TED video that we watched. The idea that we are constantly in a process of change, constantly in a process of becoming who we are. That's also true with our groups. The MVP group that you've decided to be a part of. You have the opportunity to influence your school, your peers, your teammates, your classmates in a very positive way by the decisions you make and how you conduct yourself, but also the ways that you interact and show leadership and become involved as part of your school. I wish you nothing but the best and success. Stay well and stay safe. Have a great day.